Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling, and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. And you're going to hear it from me every single week because we believe in it so strongly. The mantra, the mission that we have here at Bulletproof Selling is to help salespeople understand that hope is not a sales strategy. It didn't work on the battlefield when I was able to embed with Marine Corps teams, Navy teams, Army teams, Air Force teams all over the world. We realized these folks, they worked every single day to identify where hope was entering the plan, and they worked to remove it because they needed something that would be there no matter how stressful the situation became, how tired they were, no matter what else was going on around them. So every single week, sometimes multiple times a week, we are here at Bulletproof Selling to help you remove hope from how you sell. And over the course of the last few years, we've been able to have some incredible guests on the show. Hall of Fame speakers, best-selling authors, people that have been out there for decades managing and leading sales teams, and of course, folks that are out there every single day helping sales teams remove hope from how they sell in a variety of ways. So my dedication, my commitment to the sales profession in general, and especially to you, the viewer or the listener, is that we are going to give you something applicable at the end of this show. We're going to give you something you can walk out there in the field and actually use, and that is a sales system. You'll find out more about what that looks like, what it sounds like, and how to use it later on in the show. But without further ado, I need to jump into kind of a roundabout way of hitting today's topic. It's roundabout because a lot of salespeople put a lot of effort and energy into what happens when they finally are able to pitch to a prospect. They put a lot of effort and energy into what a close might entail, what that sounds like, how to put together that pitch deck, how to put together that solution framework for their buyers, for their prospects. But what we see a lot of salespeople over relying on hope on is not what happens in the middle of the conversation or the end of the conversation, but what happens in the beginning of the conversation. What are those things that we rely on hope with? So we, of course, hope that we show up and we're the most brilliant, most knowledgeable, best looking salespeople that prospect, that customer has ever had the experience of dealing with in their lives. That's a lot of hope. And if we fail in the first couple of seconds of our mission, we can guarantee that it's only going to go downhill from there. So we were able to find someone with more than 30 years of experience, not only working with sales teams, leading sales teams, but helping salespeople today understand that they don't have to rely on hope, especially as it applies to those first few seconds, those first few minutes of a sales conversation. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome to the show David Kurkjian. David, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Hey, Sean, thank you for having me on the show. Excited to be with you and have this conversation today.
Outstanding, sir. So, looking at your LinkedIn profile, very August, I believe is the word we use, sales career, 35 years in the sales industry. Walk us through a little bit about what that journey looked like for you, because you've gotten to work at companies, it looks like all over the US, leading teams, and then now you're out there helping salespeople. So, walk me through a little bit about what that journey looked like for you and some of the high points along the way, because God willing, we all get to have a journey in sales as long as yours. So, I want to find out how it happens.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I'm like a lot of sales professionals where we never intended when we came out of university or, whatever education we had, hey, I'm going to go into sales. For me, that happened in my first job working for Bellsouth. And what happened is the leaders and management paying attention to the work that I was doing at the time and came to the conclusion very quickly, hey, you're a great communicator. You understand the value of the products and services that we represent. We think you'd thrive in sales. And so that launched my career. And it was really a great experience because 10 years really provided the foundations for how to communicate and how to sell. From there, I went to work during the whole .com craze, worked for CareerBuilder.com. That was my first opportunity to lead salespeople. And that was an interesting experience too, because went from high brand recognition working for Bellsouth to a startup called CareerBuilder in the internet world. Nobody knew what the internet was or even, who CareerBuilder was. And so that was a little bit of a speed bump going from working for a company that had great recognition to a company that had no recognition. Mm. And then what started to happen is I worked for a couple of tech startups and I started to find my superpower. And that was taking a product or service that nobody had ever heard of before and figuring out how to talk about it in that first conversation in a way that communicates lots of value. So go back about 10, 11 years ago, understanding the impact and help that I can provide salespeople in identifying what goes into that initial conversation. I made a decision to step out of corporate America and found MasterMessaging. Now, the unique thing about MasterMessaging, Sean, I'm sure you've been exposed to a number of different sales methodologies and sales strategies.
Yeah.
And I was the one that always sat in those training workshops. And when the facilitator would say, hey, I was great, you can be great too, just do these things, I would raise my hand and go, why?
Yeah.
Because I was looking for a principle, something behind the activity that they were describing. And so when I founded MasterMessaging, I never wanted to be put in that position. So I read over 20 books on behavioral psychology, specifically to learn what's going on in the prospect's mind when a salesperson is speaking and how are they making a decision? What's happening from a behavioral psychology standpoint? And so again, that led me to the creation of MasterMessaging, and I've had the opportunity to work with over 200 companies in the last 10 years in helping salespeople elevate the value of the product or service that they represent in those initial conversations.
And you mentioned what happens in the initial part of the conversation, especially if you're selling something that that prospect or that customer has never heard about. They don't know what value it brings. And I only have a couple of seconds, maybe if I'm really lucky, a minute or two, to get them interested enough to want to hear more, or to get them answering questions, to start showing how I can provide value to their lives. So where do you see salespeople relying on hope in those first few seconds or those few minutes of a conversation, especially if they do not represent something that's universally known? I'm not showing up selling Netflix or Apple products, right? I'm selling something that they may not know about, they may not know they need. Where does
Right.
hope play into how salespeople tend to deal with that initial opening in a conversation?
Now, that's a great question. I think it comes down to their belief and conviction around the product that they represent. And here's what I mean more specifically. They hope if they speak with enough passion around what the product is and does, that will translate into the prospect looking at them and going, that's amazing. Yeah, I want 10 of those.
Yeah.
So the mistake that they make is they're putting the hope in the again, the features and the functions of the product, not in the value that it represents to the prospect. And so in those initial conversations, the common mistake that I see play out across, again, a number of these companies that I've had an opportunity to work with is they're so passionate about the product. They show up and they start talking about all the things that it is and does. And the prospect's sitting there trying to figure out, what does this mean to me? How does this impact my world? And so that's where I think hope gets misplaced, is the hope is too much on what it does, not so much on the value that it represents to the prospect.
Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we're big on bringing lessons from the battlefield into the battlefield of business. I've never met a salesperson that wasn't on the front line for their company. And so something that we realized on the battlefield is if we were pursuing a high value target, someone that was going to really be instrumental to the success of our mission, it wasn't up to them to figure out how we could be of value. We were the ones responsible for building the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the things that you're interested in achieving in your life. Here are the things that you would love to happen, the peace that you want to see in your own home community. So here are the ways that we're going to provide that for you, make your life better, help you reach your goals. And if we didn't show up like that and just said, hey, we've got, a pile of money, or, we can make some connections in the community for you, that's worthless because they don't understand how it's going to work. So talk to me a little bit about where salespeople could do a better job, because I know this is going to be probably a sales system that we're going to dive into here in a minute. But where can salespeople be doing a better job in bridging the gap between what their product or service can accomplish for their prospect and their prospect actually seeing it? Where could that bridge be built better?
Yeah, again, it really comes down to value. And, it's interesting. I've had the opportunity in working with all these different companies and doing hundreds of workshops. I always ask the question, how does a human being perceive value?
Great question.
I've only got, again, from a behavioral psychology standpoint, I've only gotten one right answer in 10 years of asking that question.
Wow.
Now, part of the reason for that is not many salespeople read Daniel Kahneman. So Kahneman is one of the most brilliant behavioral psychologists in the world. And he won a Nobel Prize in economics as a behavioral psychologist, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that he won a Nobel Prize is he cracked the code on how human beings perceive value. And so it's in a contrasting worldview. This is what your world looks like without my product. This is what your world looks like with my product. And it's in the side-by-side comparison of those two worlds that a human being perceives value. So where the salesperson needs to do a better job is early in a relationship, early in a conversation with the prospect, they have to paint that picture. Hey, here are the challenges that I know that exist in your world today. Here's the impact of those challenges. What if you could do this differently? And then start describing what their world would look like in contrast to the way that their world looks like today. So I've got a great quick example.
Sure.
I participate in a fundraising bike ride every year. It's a 50-mile bike ride called Bike to the Beach, and it's to raise money for kids with autism. And the last year that I rode, they dropped us in the middle of Delaware. And unfortunately, the road that they dropped us on had recently been stripped of the top coat. So if you know anything about bike riding, road biking, that's not the surface that you want to be on. So for 5 miles, we're riding, and it's a horrible experience. And we're trying to make sure that our tires don't blow up. We hit the newly paved section of road, and every one of the riders around us immediately exclaimed, "Oh my God, this is the smoothest road that I've ever been on." Sean, they would have never done that if we hadn't started on the unpaved section of the road. So it's that instant side-by-side contrast that creates value. So salespeople need to understand that dynamic of behavioral psychology so that they can build that contrast into the initial part of their conversation.
How does this differ from just poking at the problem, or is it the same? Because you're thinking of old methodologies like spin selling or even solutions-based selling. I got to have a problem to give you a solution for. So is what you're talking about, does it differ from just outlining the problem in a clearer way?
No, you still want to dig into the problem. And again,
Okay.
is as painful as you can make that problem in the mind's eye of the prospect, it's only going to make the contrast that much greater. So the more painful their understanding of the problem, and then you paint a picture of a better world. I think where salespeople miss the opportunity of creating contrast is they go from talking about the problem and then going, "Hey, Sean, what we do to solve that problem is," and they start describing what the product does. In the mind of the person that you're talking to, you just went from talking about their problem to your product. And so the miss there is you have to use language like, "Hey, what if you could do this instead?" And by saying, "What if you could," the prospect knows you're still talking about them. And that's what creates the contrast. You can't go from talking about their problems or challenges to what your solution does. You have to describe what it means to them and what they can do differently.
That's the building of the bridge that I was talking about before. And I like that. So it allows your prospect to put themselves in that ideal situation, to start imagining what that would look like. And that's, of course, going to give you details as a salesperson that you'd never have access to if you were
Right.
trying to just paint the picture on your own. So this is a great, great sales system we should build, because I have a feeling it's going to kick in the early part of a sales conversation and then last throughout. But I know if we mess up this initial foray into a sales conversation, we're never going to be able to position ourselves as the solution, and
Right.
especially in a prospect's world. So if we dig into how we solve problems on the battlefield, we use systems. So every new system we put into place allows us to be that much more successful on our mission. And it ensures that no matter how tired or dangerous the situation we're walking into is, we've got something that elevates our performance to a high level, because it's not trying to remember everything out of the top of our heads. Now it's just operate from the system. In addition to that, as you well know, no sales call goes exactly as planned. So with the system, it doesn't mean we're forced into lockstep. We could still innovate. So I'd love to build this now. We talk about trimming hope away with every new system.
Hmm.
So we use this acronym TRIM. The T in TRIM is the trigger element. And so if I'm a salesperson and I'm getting ready to use this to really paint the picture of what that pain looks like, and then invite my prospect to take me on a journey to what that solution state would really be for them, where do I trigger this system? Is it in the initial moments of that outreach? Is it way before I ever get on the phone with them? Where would you recommend I start if I was going to build a good system around this?
Yeah, there needs to be some preparation before you ever get on the call.
Okay.
Going back to the topic of the perception of value,
Hmm.
the mechanism that happens in a person's brain is the same for every human being, but the output of that value is unique to the individual.
Oh,
And so oftentimes sales professionals find themselves speaking with different stakeholders inside of an organization. And the perception of the value of your product or service for, say, a chief revenue officer versus a CIO, it's going to be completely different. So the preparation that goes into a call, you have to start with, who is it that I'm going to be speaking with? Who's the persona or the individual that I need to have this conversation with? And then you need to identify challenges that you know exist in their world. Because what you don't want to do is show up in the early part of that call and go, hey, Sean, I'm curious, what keeps you up awake at night?
Right. Yeah. I don't want to hear that question either.
No. What are the problems or challenges that you're facing? Because what you're communicating to that person that you should have done that research around is that I don't know your world. And that immediately communicates a lack of credibility and a lack of trust in what you're saying. So the preparation needs to be, who is it that I'm talking to? What are they trying to accomplish? And what's standing in their way? And what is unique to my product or service in helping them overcome those challenges? That's the preparation that needs to go into that initial discovery call. Now, there's a great question that you can ask in the early part of the call. So you would show up and you go, hey, Sean, I work with a lot of individuals, a lot of professionals like yourself. And some of the things that we're hearing is that they're challenged with A, B, and C. Again, these are the challenges that I'm hearing. And then you look at the person that you're having a conversation with and just look at them and go, hey, I'm curious. What does that look like in your world? Mm. So what that does is it communicates to them, oh, you talk with people like me every day. All right, so you're a credible source of information. Oh, the challenges that you just communicated, yes, I'm experiencing those. And what it does is it avoids you pointing your finger at the person and going, hey, Sean, I know you've got a problem. Because nobody likes having that happen, right? Having a finger pointed at them. And so by saying, hey, we're hearing this from other individuals like you, they can still live in what it is that you're describing. And then that great open question, what does that look like in your world, gives them the opportunity to validate the challenges that you just gave them and give you more insight into what's happening in their world.
And you're jumping right into the R in trim, which is making this thing repeatable. So if I've done the research, I've identified my buyer personas, I know what's standing in the way between where they are and where they want to be. I understand a little bit about what those challenges look like. Now, we're in the R in trim, you mentioned a great opening question. Is if I was going to develop a 5-part checklist around this. So here are the things I need to hit on every call in order to make sure I'm using what David's saying. Is that the first thing on that list? Is there something I need to do before that, right before I get on the call, or should I open with that question and then you've got some other things for me to do?
No, I would open with that question. Again, after you've telegraphed the challenges and the impact of those challenges, and they're living in the pain of what it is that you've just communicated, that would be the first question. Now, there are a series of follow-up questions. And so after the person says, yeah, David, yeah, I'm experiencing that challenge, but I'm also experiencing this challenge. The follow-up question should be, hey, Sean, what have you tried to solve that problem? Now, here's why that's a great question. It's going to give you insight into any competitors that they've tried or competitors that they may be talking to, or it may give you insight into some internal solution that they've tried to build. So what have you tried to solve that problem? Then the next question would be, okay, hey, thanks for sharing that with me. What's the impact on your organization if you can't solve the problem? Mm. So now they're going to articulate, again, more pain. Well, it's going to have this impact on our customer. It has this impact on my team. And then now is a good time to start sprinkling in what I refer to as discovery questions for the salesperson, because the salesperson needs to have more context as to what's happening in their world. So they need to ask questions like, well, so how many customers would this impact? And, how many team members are you currently working with? So there are always questions that a salesperson needs answers to in order to qualify the prospect. Okay. This would be the time to sprinkle those questions in so that the qualifying questions don't feel like a Spanish Inquisition and it feels more conversational.
And you mentioned a question that I'd want to poke a little deeper on, which is, what's the impact if you can't solve it? Have you ever gotten pushback on that from either a salesperson or maybe from a buyer when you use this yourself, where they say, well, how come you don't know the impact that this is going to have on my organization? I thought you were the expert. Has that ever happened? Because it's happened to me in various forms. So I was just curious how you dealt with it.
Yeah, no. And again, if somebody were to respond with, well, hell, David, you should know the impact. And my response to that would be, yes, I do know the impact. I'd be happy to share that with you. But I was
Okay.
just curious what your perspective was on that.
Gotcha.
And if they at that point said, well, hey, just share with me, I'd be like, oh, okay, here's the impact. It's this,
Yeah.
this, and this.
Okay. Gotcha. I was just curious about that because always interested to find where a plan could potentially fail. Let's address that before we're on the phone with a buyer.
Right.
That's always the attitude to have. All right. So we've got a couple of great steps. Folks are engaged, asking, what does this look like in your world? I've got my follow-up questions. I'm asking what the impact might be on their organization, their team, their personal life if they can't solve this problem, depending on what we're selling. And of course, the discovery questions that come after that is now we've shown them enough about our understanding of their world that they may be willing to actually reveal some things that if I started my beginning conversation with, how many team members do you have? What's the P&L for that division? They might not be willing to give that to me because they don't know if I could do anything with it. It'd be a waste of their time. But now I'm in their world, establishing that trust, getting the conversation going. I love this flow. Are there any other steps I need to be aware of in this repeatable part of our process so that I can make sure I'm making the most of your system?
Yeah. So after you've had that part of the conversation, and by the way, you'll know when the prospect is tired or getting a little frustrated, because again, they understand what's happening here, and so they'll start answering the questions with, "No, it's fine. No, we're good."
Oh
So
yeah.
again, pay attention to body language and the way that they're responding. Here's the other thing that you need to prepare for. You need to identify 3 value position statements that you can use to paint a picture of what their world is going to look like, and have those prepared in advance. And again, the value position statement always starts with, what if you could, or imagine if you could. So again, I'll give you an example of some of the ones that I might use in a conversation with a sales leader. What if you could increase the performance of the 80% that are lagging behind the top 20% of your sales organization? What if you could minimize turnover in your sales ranks? And what if you could more accurately predict the revenue and forecast for your organization? You can by partnering with MasterMessaging. Now, what I've done is I've created 3 value position statements that paint a picture of a better world. And it's important as they're delivering those statements that they've prepared that they make them rhetorical. In other
Yeah.
words, you don't want to pause after, hey, Sean, what if I could double your revenue in the next 30 days? Would that be a good thing? When salespeople do that with me, I always answer no.
Mm.
Because you don't want to ask a question like that the prospect can only answer one way.
Yeah.
It makes them feel like they're being manipulated, like they're being led down a path. Hey, what if I could do this? Would that be a good thing? Well, you can only answer it with yes because it's so amazing. So I always, when salespeople do that with me, I just go no, and they go, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I don't like being led with questions that I can only answer yes. So I'm just going to say no." But anyway, the next step would be, in your preparation, you've identified challenges, impact of those challenges, the qualifying questions that you need to ask in that part of the conversational part of the meeting, and then pivot from, hey, Sean, thanks for sharing that with me. What if you could do this? What if you could do this? What if you could do this? You can, and here's how. And then the next step is be prepared to succinctly describe how your product or service creates that world that you just painted a picture for.
Mm. Okay. I love it. And I imagine at that point well, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier to move to a close or to get that next step on the calendar or whatever that might be for the next step in your sales process.
Yeah. So the next step after that is, once you've communicated, hey, what if you could do these things, and here's how that would work. At that point, you would stop and I would just go, hey, Sean, we've covered a little bit of ground in our brief conversation today. I'm curious, what do you think?
Mm.
And it's such a great question, because you're communicating to the person that you're having a conversation with. You're communicating, I value your thought. I value your opinion. I want to know what it is that you're thinking about our conversation right now. And it'll typically go in one of three directions. The first thing that they may do is they may ask a clarifying question. Oh, you said that I'd be able to do this. I'm not exactly clear yet as to how that would happen. Could you explain that a little bit further? So certainly in that initial conversation, you don't want somebody going off confused. So a
Yeah.
clarifying question is great. The second thing that may happen, they may feed back to you the positive things that they just heard. Man, I've been looking for a way to solve that 80-20 split in my sales organization. Yeah, that sounds great. So you should hear them paraphrase back to you the positive value position statements that you created. Now, the third thing is the thing that a lot of salespeople aren't prepared for, and that's the objection.
Yeah.
Hey, I loved I liked a lot of what you had to share with me, David, but, and then here comes the objection. And so it's on the salesperson, obviously, to know the most common objections that they're going to get, those landmines in the battlefield when they're getting towards the end of the call, and to have a very succinct and powerful response to that objection.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't have time to go into it on this call today,
Yeah.
but there are emotional objections sometimes that a prospect will give you when they say, hey, I feel like, or I think, or I believe. The salesperson needs to know what's coming after that is the prospect's opinion. It's not rooted in fact. It's a bias or a feeling that they have about you. And the truth of the matter is that as a human being, you can't logic your way out of an emotional issue. And so there's this principle that behavioral psychologists use called reframes, where you use an analogy or metaphor or story that has nothing to do with the emotional issue that the prospect just gave you. And it allows them to see it in a different frame or a different light apart from the emotion. That may be a topic for another
Yeah,
conversation.
no, we definitely have to have you back on the show to work through that because that's obviously what happens next in the sales process. But if we can just do these couple of things in the initial foray into the call, the initial salvo, what better value we're going to be able to offer in that learning more about this prospect, filling out things that we didn't have before on their profile, but then doing it in a way that isn't an interrogation. This is amazing. So I've got the T for the trigger element, R for repeatable. The I in trim is where we make this thing improvable. Because I want to know that 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I'm better at this than I was today. So what am I going to look at to make sure that I am improving my initial couple of minutes into a conversation with a new prospect?
That's a great question. So go back to the open-ended question that you asked. Hey, what does this look like in your world?
Okay.
So here's something that salespeople need to understand. They get the opportunity to talk to their prospects in different companies every day. They may talk with 100 different professionals from 100 different companies. And every time they ask that question, what does that look like in your world? They should be learning something new about that professional's world. So they should be keeping a list of challenges and the impact of those challenges every time they ask that question so that they can continue to improve the communication and the understanding of the world of the personas that they're communicating with every day. They can continue to bring insights and understanding that that individual never gets exposed to because they work in their company head down every day. They're not talking to their peers in the way that the salesperson is.
That's a great way to improve it with something that we can then capture, feed to our sales team, feed to our leadership team, feed to marketing.
Mhm.
Imagine what would actually happen. And this is a common problem with almost every sales organization I get to work with. These divisions are not talking to each other. The salespeople are gathering intelligence from the field every day. If marketing could begin leveraging that and they could begin communicating better with what they're both learning, boom, I mean, massive results begin to happen. So, trigger, repeatable, improvable. Now we're in the M and trim, the final piece, David, which is measurable. So if I'm taking the time to build this, I'm taking the time to do it. I'm not just smiling and dialing like I was before. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
working from a process that may take a little longer than my previous calls, which means less gross activity. Hopefully, better quality activity, but less gross activity. So, what am I going to measure after a month, a quarter, a year of doing this to know that I'm actually getting results? Is it just gross sales? Is it engagement? Is it callbacks? What am I measuring that's really objective to know this is working?
Yeah, so you want to measure conversion rates.
Okay.
which should be fairly easy to do for most sales organizations because they're using some type of CRM.
Right.
And so as they're implementing this system in how to run a discovery call, they should be able to see how much how many what the conversion rate increase is from month to month. And I'll give you a great example. When I first started implementing this system for our clients about 7 years ago, my very first client was only converting about 8% of that initial conversation to the next stage, which is horrible. You should be seeing somewhere between 40 to 50% in your conversion rates from that first conversation to the next. So by implementing this system, they went from 8% to 47%, which was a 6 times improvement just by using some of the processes and some of the principles that we've discussed here today. So you should be measuring those conversion rates from the first couple of conversations, from discovery to demo to building out the solution. You should be looking at your conversion rates and implementing and improving the conversations so that those conversion rates continue to go up. And obviously that's going to lead to more deals dropping out of the funnel at the end of the process.
For sure. Oh man, what a great sales system. Things that this is an interesting thing about sales. The more I learn about it, the more simple it becomes. I mean, to hear all of this, you're like, why didn't I think about this myself? Well, that's why we have people like you, David, to help us guide through that process. So I want to make sure salespeople have a chance to use this because I know we've all got calls to make. Why don't we really, start this today? Start using the process that you've outlined. So if people want to get in touch with you, they want to get deeper into your brand. I know you've got things you can offer them that don't cost anything up front that help them get deeper into the process of selling your systems. Where do we go? How do we connect deeper with you?
Yeah. So go to the website, mastermessaging.com. You'll also see my book that was just released on Amazon back in May, 6X Convert More Prospects to Customers. The 6X actually came from the story that I just shared with you, a 6 time improvement in their conversion rate. So mastermessaging.com. You can certainly follow me on LinkedIn as well. And again, take advantage of the book because it has a specific outline of the entire process and system that we've described today.
Oh, that's amazing. So if you want to dive deeper, get David's book. I know you will not be disappointed. And to think about the investment, the return that you could get on whatever the cost of that book is, easy way to make a decision about how to spend your money. Well, David, thank you so much about you getting on the show. One, giving back to the sales community, two, and then giving us a system that we can all use. So for everybody that's watching us here on YouTube live stream, make sure you're hitting the subscribe button. If you are catching us via audio on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, hit the subscribe button and leave us a review and let other salespeople know sales doesn't have to involve as much hope as we're currently relying on. We could remove it day by day, week by week, using systems just like the one David gave us. So from all of us in the sales community, David, thanks for giving back, and let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, thanks for having me on the show. Really enjoyed it.